Hello everyone and welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. Again, bit of a running feature, it's a whiskey that we've never featured on the channel. This only really came out in my sort of 10-year run, so my fault, apologies, but we're here now. Kilkerran 12-year-old. A couple of weeks ago we talked about a very unusual bottle of whiskey from the early 90s which had Glengyle written on the front of it. This is actually from the Glengyle Distillery, but it is labelled as Kilkerran Whisky. For a legal reason more than anything, a different distillery owns the rights to the name, so they call the whiskey Kilkerran, and there's a nice story about it on the back of the tube, which you'll see on the cutaway. But this is a lightly peated, 46% natural colour, non-chill filtered Campbelltown whiskey, which is roughly 70% bourbon cask, 30% sherry cask, and it's quite important. And I use the words, well, the phrase modern classic a lot when we talk about things like Glendronach, Benriach, certain Balblair releases, Arran, and these guys. And it's very important to me, this whiskey, so we'll talk you through why as we sort of smell and taste it. The history of the distillery is a long one. They didn't produce whiskey for around nearly 100 years. I think it's 80 years altogether. And there's a wonderful story if you head to their website and check it all out. But regarding the whiskey, I don't personally think there is a whiskey in existence, possibly with the exception of Highland Park 12-year-old, which sums up all of Scotland in a product as much as this does. Now, it's not from the most famous region to your regular whiskey drinking folk. It isn't the darkest colour in the world, but it is a natural colour nonetheless. And it literally does a little bit of everything from every region. That might be a very personal thing. I feel like it is, but hopefully most of you will also agree with me, because I know a lot of people love this whiskey. So we'll talk through each one regarding smell and taste, and I'll explain why I think that sums quite all of those areas up. So firstly on the smell, it is from Campbelltown. It's a separate region, yes, but I always view it as part of the lowlands. And with lowland whiskies, you get those wonderful light, grassy, welcoming, freshly cut lawn, spring and summer smells. This has it in abundance. What's also present is a wonderful kind of twist of lemon, lemon skin, lemon juice, whatever you want to roll with. As you move further out west, you enter mostly, or very famous, peated territory. Campbelltown, Islay, Arran in the future as well as now, Skye, etc., Oban, Ben Nevis. That funky, smoky, minerally, peated loveliness that most of us, not all of us, but most of us do love in a whiskey, that's in there as well. And then as you see the influence of bourbon maturation and sherry maturation come through, you get elements of toffee and fudge, which reminds me of Highland whiskies. There's honey elements to it as well, and that reminds me of things like Dalwhinnie, Blair Athol, Edgedower, Clynelish, especially with that little bit of smoke running around in there. And even Old Pulteney, things like the 15-year-old, which are that wonderful balance of citrus and salt and coastal influence. And then there's always a little bit of sherry making itself known. It doesn't really come out in this particular batch unless you add a little bit of water. You get a slightly kind of chocolatey, raisiny note to it. Infamous with Speyside. There's big sherry casks from distilleries like Macallan, Tamdhu, not necessarily at Speyside, but Glengoyne, going back to the Highlands too. And all of that is retained within this little glass of whiskey, in this bottle behind me, for below £40 a bottle, in a very natural, organic process, to a degree. So we'll smell it again. Yep, all of those things still in there, with that lowland style leading the way. Fresh, grassy, lemony, summery, and then the little bit of smoke just kind of lingering around the edges. Not quite Laphroaig, not quite Lagavulin, it's not that smoky, but a style of Talisker, a style of Bunnahabhain peated whiskey, a style of 2 degree things like Port Charlotte when it gets really minerally and limestoney. But let's taste it. Initially bittersweet, again, much like the Glenallachie from last week, but it's rammed full of citrus and those clean, grassy, pollen kind of notes. The smoke only really begins to come into it as you sort of pull it towards the back of your palate, gets slightly drier, and it almost does remind me of that Laphroaig dryness that you get. It's almost like chalky and minerally and quite distinctive, West Coast all the way for sure. And then throughout the middle of the tongue, there's that fudgy, toffee, treacle element, kind of doing those wonderful bourbon cask influences. It's got a nice medium texture. It's not the heaviest whiskey in the world, doesn't need to be. And then the ABV provides like a wealth of flavour going from side to side in the tongue. Sweet, spicy, savoury, salty, even hitting like a little bit of that kind of infamous umami sort of flavour, which is, you know, comforting and quite savoury. All rounded off by a nice little bit of barrel char and almost like a salted caramel, like a fudge. It's not really rich, it's just like a little kind of seasoning of it, if you pardon the turn of phrase. If someone was to ask me, pour me a Scotch whisky which encompasses all of Scotland and all of the styles and all of the unusual history and the ups and the downs, with the exception of Highland Park 12, which has a lot more sherry influence, but is lower ABV and a few other things as well, I don't really think it gets better than that, especially for, I mean, with delivery it cost me £43, so £38 a bottle. That's quite exceptional. It's not the darkest thing in the world. They do have heavily sherried options, they do have heavily peated options, they're quite limited, but again, they're about 50 quid. They really don't break the bank. There's only one way to go with this, and I think it walks easy with a 10. It isn't the most powerful flavour you'll ever come across, but I honestly believe whiskies like this bring people into it. They open up numerous pages of history and condense it down into a single sip of liquid. And that's something extremely important, and as much detail as I feel like I've given, it's all within a single sip of whiskey, and you can taste everything from just south of Glasgow and Edinburgh, all the way up to Wick, all the way as west as Islay and Ben Nevis, and then all the way as east as things like Glenglassaugh and Glengarry as well. And it's all contained in this little tiny glass. So a 10, without doubt. I know loads of people have given this their whiskey of the year in the past. This now sits as joint whiskey of the year currently. We've only given another whiskey a 10, which was also very affordable. But thank you all for watching. This is Kilkerran 12-year-old. This is Whisky Wednesday, and that's a 10 out of 10. I'll see you soon.